Marianne Nicolson is an artist, activist of the Musqueam, Zawadainuk First Nations and Scottish descent. The Musqueam, Zawadainuk nations are part of the Kwakwaka'wakw and the Kwala-speaking peoples of the Pacific Northwest. She's trained in traditional Kwakwaka'wakw forms of culture and contemporary gallery and museum practice. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Emily Carr University of Art and Design, a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Victoria, and a Master of Arts and PhD in Linguistics and Anthropology from the University of Victoria. She works as a cultural researcher and historian, as well as an advocate for Indigenous land rights. Her practice is multidisciplinary, encompassing photography, painting, carving, video, installation, monumental, public art, writing, and speaking. All her work is political in nature and seeks to uphold Kwakwaka'wakw traditional philosophy and worldview through contemporary mediums and technology. Her exhibitions include the 17th Biennale of Sydney, Australia, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the National Museum of the American Indian in New York, Nuit Blanche in Toronto, and many others. Major monumental public artworks are situated in the Vancouver International Airport, the Canadian Embassy in Amman, Jordan, and the Canadian Embassy in Paris, France. Please join us in welcoming Marianne.
Lower down. Gaila Kesla. I almost regret that I have to speak after that. I was really enjoying what he was saying. It really reminded me of much of the way that I was taught when I was younger, and it's really strong medicine. And even years later, I think about how our old people amongst the Musqueam would speak to us, and all the lessons that are contained in what they say. And you might hear it many, many times over, but always you would learn something more every time you heard it. So I'm really grateful to be here today to speak to you, and I'm really grateful that you're here to listen. I'm going to tell a story, and it starts from within my own territory, but I'm grateful to be invited to speak from my own past in this territory. So I gave a title to the talk, and it basically breaks down as like Awinakwais is the land, Kasu means that which is great, that which is wonderful, that which is real. And I'm going to talk about my own process of coming to try to find a balance between my community-based practice and I guess what it might be considered in an individually based practice. Always I would start a talk by showing where it is that I come from, and this is, I come from the coast, a place called, its English name, today they call it Kinkum Inlet, which is somewhat silly. I'm a little attached to the name because I grew up with it, but really that was the name of a ship's admiral who came through our territory and then named it after himself. But we call it Wai, which means downriver. And so this is Wai. This is an image showing the river Wai, which really is the sustainer of our life. And our origin story situates us in this place from the very beginning. So when the ice was revealing the land, our original ancestors came down from the glacier, and they inhabited this wonderful mountainous watershed. And so we have lived there for thousands of years. Maps are a dangerous thing to us, but we use them today for our own purposes. And just to give you an idea as to the territories that we come from, so this is the north part of Vancouver Island, and you can see Hawaii there, one of the mainland inlets, kind of in the center, towards the top. So, and our people are a group of people who speak the Kwakwala language. So the Kwakwaka'wakw are that larger territory, the North Island and the mainland region. But within that nation, there's smaller nations, and the smaller nation group that I come from is the Musqueam. I'm going to start by showing this pictograph, and it was nice to hear the pictographs referenced. This is a pictograph that I did in 1998, but this photograph is from last year. It's a 38 feet high by 28 feet wide. It's something that we call aqua or copper, and it has a wolf in the upper portion of that copper, and of course the wolf was our original ancestor. This is a closer up shot. You can see the wolf, if you can make it out. He has what we call gildas, or a treasure box on his back, and the 4 stars in the bottom portion represent the Musqueam Tawadeno. I did this painting in 1998 because at the time I had been living at home in Kinkham, and the forestry company basically logged out our entire valley. And there was a point in time when they were going to spray pesticides, and our people protested the spraying of the pesticides, but they sprayed it anyways. And this really made an impression on me, and I thought, what can be done that offsets this belief in the outside world seems to have that we do not have a place here, or that we do not have rights here. And the people in the community had been saying to me, if you put a big painting on that cliff, then always, it's very visible that we are here, and it tells of our origin story. So that's how that painting came to be. This is just a photograph from 1998 when I was actually doing the pictograph, and it gives you a sense of the scale of it. So, and it needed to be at that scale because of, I think, the political context of what I was trying to accomplish with that. The origin of that pictograph work actually comes from a community base of a history of subversive protest against what was happening with the Canadian government and the province as they were encroaching on our lands and taking them over. So this is a pictograph that was done in 1921 by my great-grandfather's brothers. And what they did was they had this pictograph painted, and they put the date 1921 in there. And it's very significant because the year 1921 was the year that a number of the Kwakwaka'wakw people were incarcerated for practicing their potlatch. So while our people were being put in jail for practicing our potlatch, basically just giving speeches, giving things away, dancing, singing, my ancestors they bought some cows from the farmer who had more or less kind of taken over their lands at the mouth of the river, and they brought the cows out to the village, and they feasted on those cows, and they potlatched, and then they came down to the mouth of the river and they put this pictograph there, which actually shows the cows that they illegally potlatched with. But actually they purchased those cows off the man who happened to be the brother of the Indian agent at that time, so I guess he was acting illegally as well, but he didn't go to jail. So this is a legacy that exists in the land, and the stories that our own people were kind of a history there that they were mapping out in the territory to kind of, this is kind of like a protest painting that was put up. This is an older photograph of that image when it was done earlier, and one of the reasons why I wanted to show it is it's in its more original state. But I wanted to go back to this because you can see a rope line going through the center of the large copper, and there's a hole in the face of the large copper and another hole drilled beside it. And those were drilled into those pictographs by the logging company because they wanted to anchor their logs at the mouth of the river. So this is this constant battle between us and industry and government over jurisdiction over the land, and this is kind of, some of the acts that have taken place within our territories, disregarding who we are as a people and the history that we have there. This is one of our original villages. They call this place Wyastum, Guilford Island. We still have a village there, and it's actually very rare amongst the Kwakwaka'wakw now for communities to be situated in their original village sites because they were actively removed from many of their original sites. My own grandparents, great-grandparents really fought hard to stay in those places despite persecution. I wanted to show this image. This is part of the 1914 McKenna McBride Commission. Now, the commission traveled all over British Columbia, and basically how it was presented to us as the Kwakwaka'wakw was that the commissioners were going to come, they were going to listen to the Kikome, their chiefs, give testimony as to what their lands were. And then those lands would be protected for them because settlers were coming in and taking over our lands, and we were very concerned about it. What really happened, however, in the 1914 Land Commission was that, yes, that documentation was taken down, but in many cases, the majority of cases, those places that were identified by our chiefs were denied. And they were denied on the basis that there were already timber limits that had been allocated. And also fishing. And so industry was already coming in, and they were saying, no, we have jurisdiction over this now, and we'll recognize these small, tiny reserves for you. And that's actually where you're going to stay. So it was the exact opposite of how it was presented to us, and many of our chiefs, when they showed up, saw the maps, and they were saying, this is the first time we've seen these maps, and we have not heard of these timber limits, etc., etc. We do not understand. This is a really, really key communication that they made. We do not understand how we have lost jurisdiction over our lands when we have never agreed to it. So this was just enforced, it was forced on them. So, but the interesting thing about this image is this image is of the 4 chiefs and another chief of the Musqueam, and they came with their regalia. They're wearing their regalia, and they had their photographs taken wearing their regalia, because their regalia is actually their legal documentation within our traditions of their rights to their land. So all of the regalia is marked with symbolism that tells of their stories that situate them within their lands. So these are their legal texts that they're wearing. And I thought about these things as a, I guess, comparison to the business suits of the men who wore the or who conducted the McKenna McBride. This is a portrait of the McKenna McBride Commission in their business suits. Here is an image of all the Kwakwaka'wakw from all the different nations. So the image I showed earlier was just of the Musqueam, but you could see all the Kwakwaka'wakw came with their traditional regalia and wore it in this process. And what ended up happening, and we go back to that pictograph painting of 1921, was William Halliday was the what they called the Paiute Indian agent. And when he was persecuting and prosecuting the Kwakwaka'wakw, he told them that if they gave up their regalia, they gave up their masks, then he would give them suspended sentences. So the people really struggled with that, and they did come, and some of them came and they brought their masks, and William Halliday set those masks up in the local community hall in Alert Bay, and he put them on display, and he charged people 25 cents to come and look at them. Now these things had been kept secret, except when they were shown within a ceremonial setting or within a political context, like how they were wearing their regalia in the Land Commission photographs. So the people were very disheartened and dismayed that it would be displayed in this way. But I'm showing you this because I want to show this image next. And this is a photograph taken at the Museum of Anthropology, and it was taken a number of years ago, so it shows the old cases. And they have tried to make changes, but technically, all over the world, this is still the situation with our, what people call art, I guess. They call it art, but for us it's something different. It is both that and much, much more. So you see here the way that this is displayed, and this is of course this is 1921, and this is probably like 1990 something. So just to keep it in mind. In terms of transforming our visual symbolism, these were the interior house posts of what we call gyuptsi, or a big house, or gyupon, where our families would live communally. So this was once the inside of a house. These 2 posts held up the beams of a great house within which extended families lived. But you can see here, this is a photograph taken later in Alert Bay of the residential school. And the kids were put in the residential school, and then the posts were put front of the residential school, almost like a decorative feature of that. So, but we have to think of the symbolism of all of that and how this artwork is being transformed into something else, other than what it was. And what it's deeply entrenched in is this kind of this need or desire to take over the land and to suppress Indigenous ways of understanding that relationship in order to take over the land. Our people found ways, subversive ways of continuing to practice. And so this is a photograph that was taken in 1938, and the pole that's standing there behind them. So we have to remember it was illegal at this time, even to do this, like to show the regalia and to wear it in this way. So our people went to the priest, the church, and they said, we would like to honor King George V, who has just passed away. And in order to honor him and to show that we are law-abiding citizens of this new British colony, we'll carve a totem pole. And so the Indian agent was like, don't let them do that. They're just trying to do what they do. But the bishop was very much into this idea. And so he fully supported what they were going to do. And so under the guise of putting this pole up for King George V, our people managed to carve a pole, and they also managed to bring out all the regalia and have their children wear the regalia, and to have these photographs taken and this documentation taken of them doing this. And today that pole still stands in Kinkham, and I grew up with this pole, and I grew up with the understanding of what that pole was, and that it represented the origin histories of the Musqueam peoples, in the same way that earlier we heard this origin narrative of this place here where we stand today. In the same way, our people found a way to tell the story, to hand the story down to their children of our origin in that place. This is also a protest pole, and some people, this was based at the mouth of Kinkham Inlet, and it was put up by, again, my great uncles, the ones who put the pictograph up in 1921. And some people call this a welcome pole, and some people call it a shame pole. And so, we grew up kind of wondering, what was that all about? But when you look at the context of what was happening at that time, the farmlands, this was put up on the farmlands. And in order to put it up, my great-great-uncles told the farmer that they were giving him this pole as a gift, and that it was a welcome pole for the settlers. But in fact, if you look at the way he's standing, and it's not a very aesthetically well-carved pole, my thoughts are that it was a protest pole, and that it was to kind of shame the farmers and the settlers for coming in without settling the land question with the original owners of that place. So these are internal texts or dialogues that the community is putting out there that are understood by the community, but not necessarily by the outside world. But it's a way of keeping our way of knowing things alive. So in going back to, so this is all a communal history that completely contextualizes my own individual art practice, because when I was growing up with all these stories and understanding, but I also went to an institution to understand Western forms of art, and I went to Emily Carr, and I followed that up with like going to the University of Victoria. So I was taught all about this kind of gallery-based exhibition type work, and so this is the type of work that I've engaged in. This is actually itself also a protest image. So this is a reverse portrait of colonization. This is based on the frontispiece of a ship. It's carved in cedar. It's basically a sea captain, we call it a sea captain. And he's come either, his hands are outstretched, so he comes to take and to both give and to take. But what he gives and what he takes are two different things. So this piece is at the new Surrey SkyTrain station, and it went up last year. And it's based on kind of the idea of that protest pole, plus old carvings that you would see about, that our people did of portraits of the colonial encounter. I did this in 2009, which is a projection work onto the Vancouver Art Gallery, and basically transforming that space, which used to be the courthouse, into the interior house posts of a big house. And so I was trying to do the reverse of what had happened to those poles outside the residential school, and to recognize the history of that oppressive legal oppression of our culture, and then to uphold this kind of reversal, or to this recognition that these things actually have strength and power in them that we need to understand and come back to. And so this was a light projection piece done on the Vancouver Art Gallery. This is, in 2010, our community was flooded in a way that was unprecedented. So our entire community had to be helicoptered out by plane because the flood was so high. It was a 9-foot flood. And we'd never experienced that, and that was due to a combination of climate change, the massive logging of the watershed, which has changed the river system, and unusually high rains that year. But it was a precursor to what's going on globally. And so I created this piece, and it was shown in New York City, and basically there's a light mechanism inside the box which raises and lowers the light projection on the walls in a way that floods the space, and then it recedes, and then it floods again, and then it recedes. And this is a large painting dealing with basically, again, this flood story that we have in our origin of how we have survived the flood at the very beginning of time, which most cultures have, but in relationship to what is happening globally. And so this painting has under the water, like the national animals of the G7 nations, plus a few others included in there. So, and this was my own independent practice, and I've been doing that for a number of years, but I really felt the need to kind of try and return this independent practice, what seemed to be associated with my name, back to its origins, which was my community, because all of these things came out of my community, and I thought, how do I give back to my community? How do I resituate this again in my community, because I was starting to feel uncomfortable with how much it was being associated, my practice was being associated with me as an individual, when everything that I was talking about was coming out of a community-based experience. And a couple of years ago, our community actively started to protest the fish farms in our territory, because very, very similar to the logging companies, the fish farms were coming into our territory, and we were giving no permission whatsoever for these fish farms to be in there, because they're polluting our territories. And in fact, we were experiencing massive declines in our fish runs, and a disease within our waters coming from these fish farms. And so our community did something very, very brave, and they sent the fish farms an eviction notice. And they said, we're evicting you as the legal landlords of this territory, because we have never ceded this territory, and there has never been a legal usurpation of our rights within this territory. We are evicting you according to our own laws. Now, of course, they couldn't enforce that without some sort of an army or police force. But what they did do was that they followed that up with symbolic protest and ceremony. And so they came to the farms, and they went on the farms, and they did what we call cleansing our waters, and they went to each of these farms, and they protested, and they ceremonially cleansed the farms in a way to say that it's time for you to go. So I wanted to do something that could link my individual art practice with what was happening in my community in a more direct way. And I thought what would work would be if I tried to create an exhibition where I was working in the background, and I could work with community members to help them have the capacity and the platform to tell our stories. Because I also knew that our young people were struggling with what was happening politically and how to deal with that. And so together with Althea Thalberger, we formed a collaboration, and Althea's non-Indigenous. So it was a risk to do this, but I felt it was important to do this. So together with the community, we came up with an exhibition that's called Te Siam. And that exhibition exhibited at the Balkan Gallery, and it was a couple years in the making because we did all kinds of community-based work ahead of that exhibition, and it provided with young people in our community the opportunity to get training in artwork, particularly media, but then to also have a space to show that work and to share with the world what was happening in our communities. So what we did was we invited a number of what we called professional artists. We had to separate them into groups and stuff, and so we called the professional artists who were working out in the world and exhibiting, creating films or exhibiting in galleries. We chose a number of professional artists and we brought them to Kinkham to work with our young people. And so this is just a shot of us out on the river during one of our, what we called, I guess loosely, like this residency for the professional artists. And then this is a shot of one of the younger people working with media film work in our old big house at home in Kinkham, filming my uncle. And ultimately, over the course of working with them for over a year, we put the exhibition together. And the heart of that exhibition was actually these feast dishes, which were at the Museum of Anthropology that had been removed from our community in Kinkham and had ended up in the Museum of Anthropology on display. And there's a photograph in the background there, and that's a photograph of those masks in their more original context with all of our men in Kinkham standing around them. And that's an old photograph because my grandfather's brother is standing in the middle right next to this feast dish. But it really symbolized the idea of, the feast dish for me really symbolized the idea of community and how we feed together, we harvest together, and then these large feast dishes would help to feed us as a group, as opposed to kind of this sense of individual process and that the outside world seemed to want to impose on us. And also this idea of bringing it back into a context, the feast dish lids in particular, a context of communal expression. So this was the centerpiece of the exhibit. And then we worked together to paint this dance screen, which was behind it, which William Wasson, a member of a neighbor community, helped to compose. And then this is like a film work, a multi-channel work that we did that actually showed a lot of the work that we had done in the community. We had reenacted the McKenna McBride Commission testimony through our young people, so they were restating what our chiefs had said over the radio phones to the community, and we filmed that, and we used that as the basis of a way to teach what had actually happened with the McKenna McBride, and how even today our young people carry forward that idea, that concept, that fundamental notion of we never ceded our territories. We still don't understand why this is happening. We are deeply, deeply connected to those lands, and we want to protect them. And so this was the message that came through this exhibition, and this is one of the Lindsay Willie's photographic works that she put together. And then there was this exhibit that the Balkan put up in the library adjacent to the gallery, and it showed the press release, that the press conference that was staged at the same day that the exhibit opened. My nation, the Dawodenog, launched they launched 3 cases. One's a title case, and the other 2 are rights cases in regards to the fish farms. So the same day that they held a press conference regarding that was the same day that the exhibition opened. And the community came to the exhibit, and the exhibit in many ways was not just an opening but a celebration. And it was a tremendous celebration of the resiliency of this community to continue to stay within our lands, but also to fight for the protection of those lands against tremendous, tremendous odds. And for me, this was the most important work I had done, because it wasn't just about me creating something, even though that is very important to me as an individual. It was about me helping to create something that was deeply connected to my family and my community and the land that I grew up in. This is a photograph of some of the group, Tanya's missing, but some of us outside the gallery after the exhibition opened. I didn't realize there were so many women involved in this project until I looked at this photo. And then I'm just going to wrap it up to say we've carried forward with what we're doing, and because the title case, particularly the launching of the title case, the government did not want us to go to litigation. They'll do almost anything to keep you out of litigation. The issue for us, though, however, was that we wanted to make a statement. And given the options, we could negotiate or we could make a statement through the courts to say, this land is ours, we've never given it up, we have all the proof behind that. So it was an affirmative action for our people. And following, we were able to identify, having done that, all the steps we need to take in order to protect our lands. And part of that is going out into our lands and being out on our lands, because for so many generations we've really been restricted to our reserves. So this is one of our traditional sites, and I went there maybe a few weeks ago, and if you see the beach is white, it's because it's covered in clamshell. And it's a beautiful, beautiful location. The clamshell midden is so deep, you know the occupation's thousands and thousands of years in order to make a midden that deep. So what we're going to do is, as a community now, we're going to create a pictograph. And this is the site that we've chosen. And so the second tier up that you see in this image is the location. We'll get ladders to go up the first tier, and then cut those trees down that are covering that second tier. And that cliff face is about maybe 15 to 20 feet high, and it's about 40 feet wide. But the community is going to camp at the site that I just showed you. Tourists use it often, and Parks Canada says it's a park now, but in our opinions, it's still our territory. The clamshells are proof of that. So we're going to camp in that place as a way of reclaiming our land, and then the community members are going to create their own small pictographs, and we're going to apply them across that broad expanse of that cliff face. So it's gone from myself creating this large pictograph as an individual act of my own self in reflection to a community experience, to a community act of multiple people. And so that's going to happen maybe 2 weeks from now. And that's where I'll end it, because for me, it has been the most integral thing to speak to Indigenous issues and histories, but to do it in a way that is deeply, deeply still connected to community, because basically our identities are tied to community, and we need to have those connections to community, because the stories that we are telling are community-based stories. So, anyways, that's the end of my story for now, and thank you for listening.
I know Marianne has to head to the airport quite soon, but she's willing to take a question or two, a short one. I will take my privilege of asking a question from here, so if people have anything they can ask, I can bring them back out to you.
Thank you for your presentation. That's really incredible work. With regards to your 1998 painting, how did the outside community take me out there creating this great big huge statement on public crown land?
Yeah. Some people would ask, did you ask permission? And I wouldn't know who they were referring to, but I would ignore that as well. And because as far as I was concerned, I had gotten permission to do it from the people who were the rightful, who had the rightful jurisdiction over that place. So, there was no consultation with in any regards to recognizing it as Crown land, or that anybody had any legal say over that space other than the community.
Maybe take one more question or comment.
Thank you for sharing some of your heart. It was wonderful. Captured. Thank you.
I could say one more thing. Because I know you guys have gone through this whole process of this, intensive, summer intensive, and this idea of the relationship to land and peoples. And one of the things that has been most powerful in my life is recognizing the layered attribution of meaning that was ascribed to the land through a colonial process, and having to work to peel that away. And for myself, I've been privileged enough to come from a community that kept a different way of recognizing the land. And that's why I said at the beginning, I guess maps are dangerous, because in a way, maps are a colonial way of relating to the land as well. But we're forced today to use them to recognize certain things. But there is a real power, and I guess that's why I was so pleased with hearing the story before I was speaking. The man who delivered that story to us. There is such a powerful, different way of relating to place that comes out of an Indigenous way of being. And that comes from being in a place for years and developing that relationship and recognizing that there is a relationship there. And that's a very powerful thing. But it's also a very beautiful thing to recognize that we experience these things. You can experience it in such a different way. And to recognize that so much of the law, the current law that sits on the land currently is just that. It's a 200-year application of laws that came from somewhere else, and that there's a tremendous depth, just like that midden, of experience in that place that is incredibly tangible still, and absolutely integral to those places and how we experience them. And not just us as community members who come from those places, but also as us as human beings who come to places and then experience those places. So I hope for you, in the opportunities that you've had through the time that you've spent here, that's one of the things that might come to you, that you might be able to experience places in a much more in-depth and wonderful way than the colonial ways that have been layered on top of the lands rather than with the lands and within the lands.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And thank you, Richard, for a wonderful start, that got us going into today. Thank you, Marianne, for the work that you've shown us, but also all the work that you're doing. It's so important to see that happening within community, but also taking it out to make a better place in the world. And your activism and your art seem so connected and indecipherable from one another, which I think is a wonderful thing. Thank you. Thank you so much. By joining in, thank you, Marianne and Richard, and we will reconvene at 2:30 with the next artist panel. Please, let's thank you.